Oh, did you get, here you go. Here you go. Yeah, sure.
Work. Okay. Well, I'm glad y'all are here. This is for the, not because I think you all need to hear me, but the people recording or videoing need this to go through for the live stream. So I'm glad you're here. This is our third week with Calvin. Tonight we're going to be diving into the psychology of the fundamentalist mind, and I'm going to hush and let you go for it then. And I will keep this. If we have questions, we'll try to speak through the mic just so we can pick it up on the video.
I gave a little thought about that. I like that picture there because it's got Democrats and Republicans both blue and red, right? So I wanted something that mixes it up. So to make the point that labels can be libelous, I'll use myself as an example. So I've been calling myself a liberal in these sessions. Social issues, I am very liberal in terms of individual choice and so on. Economic, I tend to be rather conservative. And when I was on the Greenville City Council, I was very careful about fiscal kinds of matters. Religious, probably liberal. Political, actually I have leanings toward a libertarian, which is actually kind of a way of pulling in the liberal, social, and the conservative economic. So I use that as an example just to say that I think we want to use labels when they're helpful, but let them emerge out of stories and of who we are. And sometimes the farther you get away from a historical period, I think the easier it is to kind of think about these things in generalities. That was me, Scott, so I may have it going. So Peg, one of the people who've been attending this, sent me an Atlantic article about evangelical, and very helpful, and a rather standard scholarly definition of evangelical distinctions: biblicalism, high regard for the Bible. Now, notice here that I have presented evangelical as more of a right-leaning view, but not as extreme as fundamentalism on an extreme right. So fundamentalists would have this, as we talked about the first night, plenary, verbal, inerrant. Evangelicals, high regard for the Bible, they might be comfortable with that. Focus on Jesus' salvation, which leads to evangelism, the third point. The fourth one, activism. I guess that's probably true of most evangelicals, but I think there's a segment that are not that interested in political activism. I just love this quote here, though, and I had to put that up from the article. The religious historian Marsden said that the evangelical Christian was anyone who likes Billy Graham. That's a little bit dated. Graham's dead, but that's, I think, makes a good point. Okay, and then also, I think it was Beth that asked about has there been a longitudinal study from Smith's work on youth religion? And yes, there is a 2009 book that charts that. And some surprising findings here. Parents are the most important influence on young adult religion. Parents might wonder if they have any kind of influence on their kids, but the study suggests they do. Teenage participation in evangelism, missions, and youth groups does not predict a high-level religiosity just a few years later. I wouldn't want youth ministers to close down their shop based on this. This is one study, but it was a surprise. Smith presents this as a surprise. And then the last point there is a common wisdom that religiosity declines during young adult years and then maybe comes back when folks have kids and so on, and there's maybe some question about that. And he focused his work that I presented last time on youth religion, but he's done lots of other stuff, and I thought the book here, 2011, was very interesting. 5 major problems facing many young people as he does these surveys: confused moral reasoning, routine intoxication, materialistic life goals, regrettable sexual experiences, and disengagement from civic and political life. That certainly does not characterize all young people, by no means. I mean, look at the college campuses on the issue coming out of the Middle East, but that is interesting, and I do see that in a lot of students that I teach. His work was funded by Lilly foundation and is quite reputable kind of work. There's a Roman Catholic story as well. Thanks, Peg, for sending that. There's a Roman Catholic story, but we won't go into that. Our focus has been on Protestant religion in America. And then COVID question. There's probably a lot more out there than this, but a very reliable place to go for this kind of information is Pew Research Center. That's always my first choice for looking something up. And I don't think we're surprised that, number one, that the adults attending dropped 33 to 30% during the pandemic, and that white evangelical Protestants were most likely to attend in person. That gets tied up into the whole masking and anti-vaccine and all that kind of stuff. And there is indications out there that COVID exaggerated political tensions that are already present on the political landscape. Okay, we're going into the psychology session tonight. This will be the most, if there's anything controversial that I say in any of these sessions, this will be the most controversial session, and I'm wide open to feedback and disagreement about what I present out there. So, and I want to qualify that this is theoretical, and by that I mean that it emerged out of my study of clinical psychology, working here in town where I came to be sort of the go-to therapist for people with religious issues, worked part-time, continued teaching at ECU, and also working with students through the years. I mean, you get lots of interesting experiences with students with various backgrounds. And so it's theoretical, and I had intended back when I wrote the book to then move into empirical studies and start doing the kind of thing Christian Smith did, but I got very, very moved in a totally different direction with my research program, and so it just remains a theory out there. It is one possible way to understand some fundamentalists. I am not saying everybody fits this profile. It fits fundamentalism more than evangelicalism. Okay, so on that spectrum, liberal, moderate, evangelical, and fundamentalist, the profile I'm presenting fits the extreme version of Protestant Christianity. And it may shed some light on extremism in other religions. That was not my focus. Okay? So, as soon as Frankie sat down in my office, my professor's office, I knew there was something weighing heavily on his mind. He squinted his eyes and spoke with a nervous intensity. The Bible says God brought 600,000 men out of Egypt in the Exodus. But you said in class last Thursday that the number couldn't be accurate, he began. And I nodded. You're saying the Bible isn't true, he continued, looking intently at me as if seeking some answer different from that given in class. At this point, I briefly reviewed our class discussion about the nature of the Bible, the different kinds of truth in the Bible, namely historical and spiritual. He was not satisfied. This number has to be right, doesn't it? I briefly recounted the reasons why the number 600,000 in Exodus 12 is problematic. Now, I won't go into that here, but there's a language issue there, and there wasn't 600,000 men that came out of and moved through the Sinai. I mean, the Bible itself says there were 2 midwives that served this community. I mean, they were working overtime if there were 600,000 men plus all the women and children. So there's a language issue here. But then he says to me, Frankie says to me, if the Bible is wrong here, it's wrong everywhere. He said with an anxious look on his face. It cannot be wrong here. And after some discussion, I said, Frankie, I know you do not think the number is incorrect, but what if it were? What would that mean to you? And he thought for a moment. It would mean that the Bible cannot be trusted. It's wrong about God. We wouldn't know how to be saved. And over the course of the semester, he sat down in my office a half dozen times, and every conversation was some version of this one. He was a bright student,
performed well in class, but he resisted the possibility there was any kind of error in the Bible. Entertaining the very idea left him troubled and uncomfortable. It was as if his logical mind saw the reasoning, but his anxiety about being saved overwhelmed his rational processes. Of course, I changed the names and some of the details. You would never be able to know who this is. So that's my thesis. This is Martin Marty. Martin Marty was a fabulous historian of religion, University of Chicago, and also was editor of Christian Century magazine, a liberal magazine, and was always whenever there was some news item, they would go to him and stick the microphone in. He's a tremendous historian. And the American Academy of Arts and Sciences funded what's called the Fundamentalism Project. It was 6 to 10 years long, 5 volumes, 3,700 pages, 10 conferences, 100 scholars were involved, looking at modern religious fundamentalism all over the world. This was a major project by Martin Marty and his colleague, and was published in 1991 through 1995. So here is my underline. Here is a statement that provides a context for what I am trying to do. Religious fundamentalism has appeared in the 20th century as a tendency, a habit of mind found within religious communities and paradigmatically embodied in certain representative individuals and movements. It manifests itself as a strategy or a set of strategies by which beleaguered individuals, believers, attempt to preserve their distinctive identity. In other words, Christians feel assaulted. They feel like their identity is assaulted, and they want to preserve that. There's a psychological basis here, I think, as a people or as a group, and feeling their identity to be at risk. And let me tell you, when your identity feels at risk, we don't have anything else beyond our identity. There's nothing there. It's chaos. And so that's really scary when people's identity is threatened. So feeling their identity to be at risk in the contemporary era, these believers fortify it by a selective retrieval of doctrines, beliefs, and practices from a sacred past. These retrieved fundamentals are refined, modified, sanctioned in the spirit of pragmatism. They are to serve as a bulwark against the encroachment of outsiders who threaten to draw the believers into a syncretistic, a-religious or irreligious cultural milieu. Fundamentalism, not only in Christianity, but in various religious forms, is a response to modernity. It is a reaction to the modern world. It is, in a sense, modern, in the sense it is a reaction to modernity. Well, let's read it. These individuals, these innovations in supporting doctrines lend the retrieved and updated fundamentals an urgency and charismatic intensity reminiscent of the religious experiences that originally forged communal identity. Okay, so cognitive therapy. Aaron Beck, this is a major school of thought in therapy. It's used by many, many therapists because it tends to be quicker than the old Freudian approach, and of course insurance ain't going to pay for years of Freudian therapy. So cognitive therapy tends to be more efficient, and Aaron Beck is the father of this, and I want to give you just a brief education about cognitive therapy. So, it is based on the idea that thinking leads to emotions and behavior, and specifically schemas, cognitive schemas. What is a cognitive schema? It is a core cognition. It's an assumption, a belief, an attitude that is unexamined and often illogical. This is not something, according to this school of thought, that we work out, carefully as an adult and read books and work. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that emerges as little kids. So these core cognitions or schemas determine how we interpret events in our lives. And our interpretation of those events then produce emotions and behaviors. And so when our core cognitions, our schemas, are distorted then and illogical, then our patterns of thinking and our emotions can be distressful and dysfunctional. And of course, the cognitive therapist's job is to help correct those maladaptive thinkings. So events don't cause us dysfunctional behavior and stressful emotions. It is our interpretation of those events. So we have a hurricane and a limb falls on your house and causes a leak. One person says, "Oh, this is horrible. My house is leaking. How unlucky and how horrible and how bad God is." And the other person says, "Oh, how graced I am that the tree didn't fall on my house." And you see, cancer, somebody gets cancer, and one person says, "This is horrible. Why me, Lord?" And the other person says, "What a graced life I've had. I'm going to make every day count," right? So I could give zillions of examples. It is, according to the cognitive therapist, it is our interpretation of events that yield our life. Not only our emotions and behavior, but our whole personality comes out of this. So it's pretty significant. So now I'm going to go into, let's see what else. Okay, I think I covered that. Oh, these are formulated, as I said, very early in life and have a childish kind of quality to the language and are usually emotionally fraught. Let me talk about that for just a bit. So, without going into great detail on cognitive therapy, basically we have these schemas that shape our personality, shape our behavior and our thinking. So, for example, and Aaron Beck and his team have, issued books about the whole structure of depression, the whole structure of anxiety, and so on. But for example, this is some little kid, right, who is not thinking logically necessarily, and unless I do everything perfectly, I'm a failure. Now, again, we may not, as adults, logically think this. We know, oh, that's not accurate. But we're talking about embedded, deep structures that are motivating and driving us that are unexamined. And that, of course, in the therapy room, what happens is you get to examine that. But that right there can lead to depression, OCD. If I'm not careful, something terrible will happen to me. You can see a little kid, right? Like 3, 4, 5 years old. This is where these things are born. Panic, anxiety. Here's a really good Southern schema. I made that one up. If I'm nice, bad things won't happen to me. Well, that's, BS. But there are people that operate their lives that way. And then here's one, that just to give you an example. If I count correctly, I'll be safe. I had a client, I'm, making everything so you don't know who I'm talking about, but I had a client who had severe anxiety. Well, we got down to a schema. He was like 5, 6, 7 years old or something like that. His parents would have these horrible arguments. He would be in the bed scared to death. His dad would come in and blow him out and sort of beat him around. And so what he did was he would just look at the curtain and he would count the designs on the curtain. And one time he counted the designs on the curtain and his dad didn't come in and beat him. And his parents quit arguing, and it got embedded that, well, if I count correctly, I'll be safe. He became an accountant. He's a CPA. So this is humbling. I mean, when cognitive therapy helps you see how your whole life comes out of some of this stuff, it's pretty humbling. I want to also note the role of emotion, that these schemas get embedded deeply very often in what cognitive therapists call hot cognitions. That is, in times of great stress and fraught, right? It's this little kid scared to death that his daddy's going to beat him, right? That's when they get embedded. And that has implications to explain, in my view, why some people on an extreme religious right is very tense to discuss things with them. It's very, and of course now liberals can be this way too. I'm not giving you a talk on the psychology of liberalism. We'll do that next year, but I don't have one on that. But my point is, I'm just trying to help understand the mind of the. Okay, now here is, based on the cognitive program, here is my thesis, my theory. And it goes like this. That I boiled it down to, if I don't get it right, I'm not a Christian and I'll go to hell. Okay, so what is it? Well, it is the belief system. We looked at that the first session. There is a extreme right-wing fundamentalist Protestant belief system that has to do with the Bible and so on. All right, if I don't, and all, the whole worldview comes out of that. Everything, all the truth of the universe is contained in this book. And if I don't get it right, that is, if one piece is wrong, then I'm not a Christian. And it's not just that I'm not a Christian, but for a fundamentalist Christian, Protestant, being a Christian is their identity. That's their core identity. So your core identity is being threatened by not getting it exactly right, and the consequences are pretty severe. Hell, okay? So that's my thesis. And notice that it is, I think, illogical, because classic fundamentalism doesn't even, talking about the professor fundamentalists, they don't even say that you have to have every piece of your system right. They have certain core fundamentals, but I'm talking about many fundamentalists operate psychologically as if, like Frankie, well, if this one verse is wrong, the whole house comes tumbling down. Okay. And I have had some encounters with the clients and students who behavior was, if I don't do everything right, but that's really not been my experience in the therapy room and in the classroom or in the office. It has been more the belief system. And I want to qualify this. I am not talking about mental illness here. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which American Psychiatric Association uses to diagnose people, there's not one in there for fundamentalism. So I want to be clear, I'm not saying fundamentalists are mentally ill. I'm trying to draw a profile. Okay. Now, quickly, I want to just round out the profile by just talking about some other things. This right here is my basic cognitive therapy thesis about that anxiety is at the root of all this. But let's just round it out. So, since World War II, post-Holocaust, there's been a lot of attention given to fascist and Nazi movements and their psychology for obvious reasons, because of the horrific tragedy of that period of time. And so there's been a lot of work on authoritarianism. And I want to be clear that I'm not suggesting that the fundamentalist profile fits all of these things neatly. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just looking at this as a way that I think can inform the way some fundamentalists operate. So the first one, characteristic of authoritarianism, is submission to established authorities. And here, in the traditional old-style fundamentalism, the church and the pastor was, the fundamentalist pastor was critical and key to the fundamentalist congregation and to the group. So there was a lot of allegiance to the interpretations and authority given to the pastor. Authoritarian aggression can mean in authoritarian movements physical, psychological, financial aggression. That's not what we see in fundamentalist Christians in America. We don't see that, or at least we don't generally see that. There's no physical violence. So I would use the word pressure there. I do think that there is pressure out from some people who live their religious lives within fundamentalist groups. And then conventionalism refers to the pressure or the need to be in this enclosed society and be consistent with that. And the last one, the uncertainty reduction, fits well my notion about anxiety, that a lot of the behaviors and beliefs within that authoritarian group structure or community has to do with reducing uncertainty. And that's getting jacked up in a world that is increasingly uncertain. But uncertainty reduction, the kind of street way of, the street term for that is closed-mindedness. That, we don't look at, we don't question God, we don't question the Bible like Frankie, we just accept it. Okay. So if there's one slide that's going to be more controversial than any other slide, it's going to be this one. So the term cult. Now, religion scholars have started using a different word here because religion scholars try to be objective, and so the new term is new religious movements. But here are some cautions and qualifications about even talking about this with respect to extreme right-wing Protestants, is that I actually do not think, I'll just say it, I do not think that fundamentalism as it has emerged in American history has been a cult. It does not. It doesn't fit the profile in the same way a classic cult like Jim Jones. It doesn't fit that. And I think there are some features of the cult that can have some family resemblance, if we could use that. So there's three things that I think about when I think of a cult: a central, authoritative, charismatic leader. Central to the movement, authoritative, we've already talked about that, and charismatic, we don't mean speaking in tongues. We're talking about John F. Kennedy, Hitler, kind of charisma, a powerful leader. Jim Jones had that. So coercive persuasion, it comes out of cults, according to the scholars. And when we're talking about coercive persuasion, we're talking about several features here. Total control and isolation. You can see that with somebody like Jim Jones's cult, right? So you don't have that with fundamentalist churches, for example. You don't have that total control and isolation. So it's not a cult. But there is this sort of be ye separate, right? That's one of the code one of the words in fundamentalism. Be ye separate. Have your own. And there was this period of time we talked about in the history section where fundamentalism sort of drew into itself and created its own institutions and its own children's homes and its own Bible colleges, right? So there is this kind of sense of we need to control our community so they won't be, polluted by the liberal secular society, right? confusion and uncertainty. You know, you hear about Charles Darwin in school, you don't believe that. That's not true, right? Stick over here with this. Guilt and humiliation. Look, fundamentalists don't have a, don't have the, they're not the only ones that can do guilt and humiliation. I mean, plenty of groups can do that, but that is can be a part of the extreme right-wing sort of control mechanism. Aberration of an existing religion. Traditional cults pull out of some existing religion, like Jim Jones was associated with Christianity. And so I do think that fundamentalism in its most right-wing version is looking at the long history of Christianity and its mainline theological affirmations. I do think fundamentalism is an aberration. I do not think that is mainline Christianity as it has emerged out of the Judeo-Christian tradition and the Bible. Absolutist. Now we've already talked about that just a bit, but there is this sense that it's either all right or, as Frankie said, I can't believe in God and I don't have an identity. Okay. So we all have these defense mechanisms in life and perhaps in our religious situation, we defend ourselves in various ways. In the book, I go through how some of these defense mechanisms show up in fundamentalist culture. The last one there is a lot of these terms came from Freud. There's a whole bunch of defense mechanisms. But the last one is my contribution to the psychological category of defense mechanisms, and it's proof texting. And if you've ever had a conversation with a fundamentalist who believes the Bible is plenary, inspired, and inerrant, then you know this is a mechanism that they use. It's like you try to have an engagement in some issue, and if they can remember it, they'll quote some text. And so that's what we call proof texting. I think it's an unfounded approach to interpreting the Bible, but it is, I would call it a mechanism that has psychological value for the fundamentalist. Okay, this is going to be controversial too, and I'm going to criticize it myself when I get to the end of it. There's been James Fowler, professor at Emory University, is a psychology of religion, and he and his team did a lot of work on the stages of faith. And the stages of faith, they interviewed hundreds, maybe thousands of people, and they identified what they would call the stages through which people can move in their religious journey, in their spiritual journey. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it starts out in infancy, and he characterizes this. Number 3 and number 5 are the ones that I wanted to call attention to. Number 3, he calls the mythical literal in what he calls a healthy developmental healthy development. Then the kid comes in around elementary school. They can distinguish the real world. They're not like a baby. But they've not yet developed an appreciation for symbolic and metaphorical nature of religious language, and they're still submitting to the authority of their parents, okay? And by the time they get, according to Fowler, to stage 5, he finds people who are characterized by, they now are experiencing the world, a critical examination of values and their own beliefs. They shift from reliance to external authorities to authority within themselves. They develop the capacity for empathy and so on. And so basically the critique here is that many fundamentalists, some fundamentalists, are stuck at level 3. Now, this scheme here absolutely can be critiqued by saying that this is Fowler's understanding of what is, healthy and mature and what is not, right? I mean, universalizing one's understanding of other religions and so on. So this is Fowler's personal view that is influencing how he organizes the interviews that he's done with these thousands of people. So that's the critique, right? A fundamentalist may say that, well, I think that taking the Bible literally, not really going down this path of metaphorical, symbolic, all that stuff you liberals talk about, that's level 7. That's the highest you can get, okay? So that's the critique, you understand, that Fowler's theological view and ideology is being overlaid on his interview results. Okay, got that. Now, in defense of Fowler's system is rooted in the developmental work of Piaget. Now, if you know anything about developmental psychology, that's a big name. This is not just some theology professor at some theological school who's pulling this out of nowhere. It's grounded in work of Piaget. And so if Fowler is incorrect, if you're going to criticize Fowler, you almost got to take on Piaget. Not only Piaget, but Lawrence Kohlberg and Erik Erikson. So you've almost got, in other words, his work on the faith development is not just coming off the wall. It is grounded in scientific psychological work. Okay, so that's the Fowler response to you're just pushing your theology off on your stages of faith. Okay? So you've got both sides there. All right. So I think this is a very important slide in terms of understanding the psychology of fundamentalists. That I think they, like all of us, live in a context of rapid change and existential threats. Exponential technological growth. ChatGPT and runaway AI is just the sort of the latest that. And lost jobs is an example of the threat that people might feel because of exponential technological growth. Global climate change, nuclear catastrophe, political tension and unrest, you know about all those. The last one is a word you may not have seen, superintelligence. This is the work I do now, and I think superintelligence is an existential global threat that I think is probably, given the next 10, 20 years, is bigger than the three that are right before it. But we won't go into that. But once you understand what superintelligence is, you may be, scared to death about that. And it also has possibilities for good. So I think all of these things present people, including fundamentalists, with living in a threatening world. And so that creates, the anxiety, the fear that gives that, as Marty said, that opens or lays the table for developing your theology and your view of the Bible in such a tightly wound way that you can defend yourself against the tremendous threats that we live in today. That's basically my theory. All right, here's what. So it's 7:15. I'm going to rapidly go through the next few slides. We're not going to do those, but we can come back and do them if there's not enough questions, right? And if we don't get to the next few slides, we'll put them next week. That's the catch-all week. Okay, so I'm just going to go through. Okay, So here's my last slide. We'll take questions. So, and since this is a controversial, I've been pretty hard on fundamentalists tonight, I think. And so I want to end with some balance. And this is the last 2 or 3 pages in the book that I wrote about Otis and Jerry and my mom. So Otis and Jerry live in Buffalo, New York, and Susan and I have friends up there who are a couple of friends who are Roman Catholic, and they wanted to introduce us to Otis and Jerry. And they're African American. They live in a rundown section of the city in Buffalo, and they are 88 and 86 years old. And I'll say this, and I write this: if every Christian on the planet had 1/10 of the love for kids and the dedication to putting that love into practice that this husband and wife team have, every social issue on this planet would be solved in 1 generation. They are an amazing, inspiring couple, 88 and 86 years old. This was a number of years ago. They are both fundamentalist Christians. If you go down the list, and do you believe the Bible? Yes. They check every box that we had on the first session about what fundamentalism believes, okay? But they are not. If you push them, yes, they're inflexible on those things, but if you experience them as people, they are not inflexible, authoritarian, worried about their identity when encountering them. In fact, they work with our Catholic friends. If they're going to help kids, they'll work with them. And so they started by inviting poor kids into their neighborhood, into their home on the long summers when the kids were out of school, and they just saw the need, and who are kids who are just one move away from prison, dropping out of school, and they give Jesus the credit, and they talk about being saved. They are fundamentalists, right? Okay, and they have, at 88 years old, Otis was just so excited to tell me about his plans to raise money to build a gymnasium for these people. I mean, he's 88 years old. And he said, children are the joy of the Lord, and they shouldn't have to put up with broken down houses and dope and sex abuse. And when I asked them about their doctrine, what they believed about the Bible and creation and evolution, all that stuff, they would answer all the right stuff for a fundamentalist. But then in a sentence or two, they're talking about the kids and what we can do to help the kids. So the second to the last paragraph in the book, and then I'm going to take questions. I would prefer to have Jerry and Otis as my neighbors rather than an arrogant liberal who interprets the Bible like I do. I would prefer my children to be mentored by Jerry and Otis rather than by a selfish liberal who thinks like I do about God. All fundamentalists are not the same, and all liberals are not either. Both fundamentalists and non-fundamentalists have incredibly loving, generous, contributing members of society. Now, while I acknowledge that, I just did, I do not back away from my basic thesis. I think, on balance, fundamentalist Christianity is biblically unsound, theologically suspect, and psychologically problematic. And it is a threat to the common good when it influences public policy and political processes. All right, so that's it. Next week is wrap-up week. Here's my plan. You could convince me to change it, but I want to have a conversation about how liberals and conservatives can work together and how the areas where it's of no use to try to work together. So I call it left, middle, right, dialogue, cooperation. Can we? Yes. On everything? No. So I want to have a conversation about that. Then I want to have a conversation about how to talk to a fundamentalist effectively. I'll give you specific suggestions about that. And then we'll go as far as we have time. Is Jesus the only way? This is a big issue for fundamentalists and liberals, and exclusivism versus inclusivism. And then we may not get this far, but if we do, I want to talk about miracles, because it's another thing that they disagree on a lot. And then fighting over Genesis. And that's the plan for next week. So I just want to thank thank Scott again and Amy and Cedar Bridge for providing a platform for sometimes very hard conversations. And if you were not here last time, have the handout that I gave out. That's it. You can now moderate Q&A.
Questions?
Okay, you want me to go back to the slides we missed? Okay. Yeah, Beth.
So when I've been trying to understand some of the fundamentalism with the political discourse in this country, I've talked to my mom some because I think she's wise about it. And one thing she kept telling me is that with the current political leadership, potentially, that a lot of, in her mom's view, a lot of fundamental Christians feel as if they have not been listened to. Mm-hmm. And so what they're being told now is, I hear you, I'm listening to you, I am your voice now. And that, so when you earlier tonight said in Marty's work that often those believers feel that their identity is at risk and they want to fortify it, I guess my question for you is that what you see fundamentalists being told from some of the political leaders that they admire? And then the second question I have is where you said in your hypothesis or your premise, if I don't get it right, and it is more of a belief system than actual behaviors, is that how actual behaviors that we're hearing about this week don't seem to matter as much as long as you're in tune with your belief system?
So the first question, I do think that I think that's right. I think that a lot of people feel beaten down, and religious people, some religious people feel beaten down too, like people who may not be religious, but and we could talk about the socioeconomic, profile here, but I think that's true. That I think your mom's right, that they feel beaten down. And I think that when they sense that somebody is giving voice to their feeling beaten down, they go for that. My concern is that they go for it. They throw logic and facts out the window and they just go for it because it feels very like they're able to vent. But I agree with your mom on that. Maybe others have different views, but I think your mom's right. So I personally would say, yes, you need to be listened to, but let's have a rational conversation about what the path forward is, right? So sometimes if a religious person feels beaten down, somehow they jump to the conclusion that the path forward is to just have prayer in the schools for everybody. Make all the kids. Let's have all the kids pray, and let's turn this into a Christian nation, and that will solve the problem. See, I think that just going to make it worse. So I think their gripe, I call it a gripe. What's the word we use these days? Their complaint, their concerns. Are understandable, but the solutions, we have to have a diverse society sit around the table and figure out the solutions that work. And they're jumping to solutions. I think I'm giving you a very biased view here, but I think they're jumping to solutions that are offered by people who don't have their best interest at heart sometimes, playing on their emotions. Your second question, you'll have to state it again.
So it was just, that you said in your premise that if I don't get it right, I'm not a Christian, I'll get help. And it is a belief system more than an actual behavior. So
Yeah.
I'm being facetious there.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess it's just, they're
Well,
saying, I have this belief system, and the behavior doesn't.
yeah.
Are they willing to let that slide?
Yeah, some of what's.
I think we, I'd pull back from the history section. There was a time in this country when, like Bob Jones University, the fundamentalists closed, be ye separate from that secular world. We won't have anything to do with it. But with the 1980s, Jerry Falwell, the political right and the religious right got very married, and it still is right down to the present. And so the political right is interested in behavior. They're interested in action. They're interested in taking control of the government. So if the religious right's going to marry to the political right, then they're going to be pulled into behavior.
But they're starting from the belief.
Yes, I would say yes. They feel like their beliefs are threatened, and the way Bob Jones University, the separatists, interpret that is, well, our beliefs are threatened, but we're just going to wind ourselves very tightly around each other and around the Bible, and we're going to get to heaven, and then God's going to, the judgment's going to come, and they're all going to be blown to hell. But then the Jerry Falwell view is, well, yes, all that's true. We're going to get to heaven, but we're tired of the liberals controlling things and telling us what to do. So we want to control government. Yeah.
My research is not very academic, but I've read a lot of autobiographies. Like the Duggar children have come out with their own. I've watched the Shiny Happy People documentary. And I think what I have gathered is oftentimes the belief, Beth, is that person that we're looking up to or we're hoping to be our righteous leader, although his actions may not be, for the betterment of the country, what he stands for will supersede his actions. I read this book, Jesus and John Wayne, and it was very much like, okay, Reagan may have been divorced, but we're just going to look the other way because what he stands for will be good overall. He'll bring more good to the country than his actions are. And that seems to be the same kind of anecdotes that I hear for people who are fundamentalists in their beliefs religiously, but also support maybe Trump. What he stands for, what they would say is what he stands for, what he'll do for our country is better.
Yeah.
It takes precedence over what he does as a person.
Yeah, and he looks like me.
And there's a difference too, I think, with
The definition of, I'm not trying to say who's a Christian and who's not, but Christian nationalism and American Christianity versus what Jesus said be about are two different things. And so sometimes I think if a fundamentalist has more of an American Christianity viewpoint than political leaders who are saying one thing and doing another or whatever, that sort of lines up with American Christianity. It doesn't line up with Jesus, but those are two different things in my head. You see people, they're defining themselves as a Christian, but they're, it doesn't look anything like Jesus. And I also know that's biased because I'm saying it doesn't look like what I think Jesus is saying, so it's.
One comment too about that, sort of to bring in a psychological interpretation, is I think that sometimes that the lay people, the people that go to work every day down at the shop and at the factory, that their concerns are genuine and their desire for some solution is genuine. Now this is a heavy assessment, but I think sex and money and power are powerful drivers for human beings. And so when people move up the line, whether it's in government or business or whatever, a lot of money, and they get power, they may have started genuine, but it's very easy to be corrupted, right? So I think sometimes you have this disconnect, which is what you're saying, between the people, the followers, who are go to work at the factory every day, and then they come home, and then they follow someone who's risen to a level of power and got a level of money that is just corrupting. They're just corrupt, you know. So we have to be critical of our leaders and, you know, make sure that we, you know, hold them to standards of integrity. So I think that dynamic is sometimes going on.
I'm trying to put together some pieces, and I'm hoping that I'm putting together right. And the steps that you're talking about of a progression kind of faith, and that people that speculate in that
Right.
fundamentalists get to kind of phase 3 and don't necessarily leave there. Is it a couple of questions, to say like your childhood schemas got you to 3, and that's just, and you're not ever questioning those, but then when the outside people kind of question it, you feel attacked and you react childlike, as far as the like lashing out and
I think that's I think I would agree with what you just said. But the cognitive schema thing is one thing, and then the rounding out the profile, the stages of faith. Fowler was not necessarily a cognitive theorist, and so there's not necessarily it would be interesting to see how, I'm not sure I can do it on my feet here, but it'd be interesting to look at how Aaron Beck talks about development and then see how that might fit with Fowler. But I think probably what you said is probably about right, that there is a connection there, that in order to get to a more universalizing kind of approach to the world and approach to one's life, you're going to have some self-knowledge. It may not come from therapy, but you've got to. It can come from a lot of different places, but you've got to have some kind of self-knowledge and maturity that gets you beyond operating out of these childhood schemas that are very illogical and unrealistic and damaging.
and that you never really thought about why you think or feel that way.
Yeah.
And then you feel attacked.
Yeah.
You don't have any other way to respond other than that
it
childlike.
is, as a therapist, it is an amazing, it's just like an amazing experience as a therapist to be in the therapy room and see someone unpack one of those schemas and see like this accountant, like, oh my God, this is why I'm an accountant, right? And so it's just amazing. And so that self-knowledge has to come before you can get beyond, these lower stages, according to Fowler. So I think he would agree with that, yeah. Okay.
Will you, I think too about, like you were saying, to stage 3 was like the, kind of reality versus, I don't know if you can go back to that slide or not. I can't remember exactly what stage 3 is, but if you're not encouraged to ask questions as a child and taught that that's okay and that questions are encouraged, then, if the underlying belief is what you think and what you believe is what you're holding on to more than anything, and then you're never encouraged to ask questions in your faith training in school and church and all that. So it's just precipitating the cycle.
Yeah. Oh, I don't have to look to respond to that. Yeah, two things. Number one is, a part of moving into more developmental maturity, according to Fowler's system, is developing a kind of a critical reasoning where you're not simply, now it's appropriate, see, for a little baby or a toddler to obey their parents. That's well, maybe not if telling them to, shoot yourself or something, but I'm saying in a normal developmental process, toddlers they need to hear what their parents are saying, and they are the authority. Don't cross without looking, that sort of thing. But when you get to these other stages, you don't simply transfer the authority of your parents to the authority of the church pastor or some TV evangelist. You don't do that. That's not maturity. And so you bring a critical analysis. And the second thing I was going to say, which I forgot what it was. Go ahead.
Could that relate to, you had the slide about cults and not, fundamentalism ticks some of those boxes, but not all of them. But if people...
Checks them halfway, I would say.
Yeah. If people enter into... I think you can have... I guess this is more of a question. Can you have a receivable mindset and coming into something like fundamentalism, if you've been taught not to ask questions, just to take what your parents have said, and that is safe, and then you transfer that over to your faith, and that's the safe person. And because sometimes people describing coming out of fundamentalism or evangelicalism, it is cultish. I mean, it sounds like they are coming out of a cult, even though maybe it's not
Totally
defined
agree.
that way.
I agree with that. And I thought of the other thing I was going to say is that the slides that we are going to do next week, which I skipped, had to do with doubt. Doubt. And so there's studies that suggest that that fundamentalists have doubts, right? But they don't do anything with them if they stay in the system, right? And so it's when they start asking or examining those doubts. And young people have doubts, and there's study on that young people have doubts and they don't usually talk about them. And so I was going to talk about all that because there is a way to doubt healthy. And for youth, Susan and I, when Susan was a youth leader, we had this exercise that we did. The kids wanted it. Every year they wanted this exercise, which came out of the notion of healthy doubting and how to do that. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Okay, so be back next week. Thank you. Be back next week for part 4. Hey, before we go, can you give us a this is probably a ridiculous question. Can you define superintelligence really quickly?
Yeah. Superintelligence. So you've heard about artificial intelligence and how it is moving and being advanced. Okay. When it reaches artificial general intelligence, that means it can do what we do. It's now reached our level on all. See, right now, artificial intelligence can do certain things very, very good, right? But it hasn't reached artificial general intelligence, which is human intelligence. But when it reaches human intelligence, plenty of people think that what it's going to do is then it's going to go beyond human intelligence. So take the average human intelligence and say multiply it by 5. That's superintelligence. Well, if it can be multiplied by 5, maybe it can be multiplied by 100. So you take that, you hook it to robotics so it can act in the world, you hook it to the internet so it has knowledge, and you may may solve global warming, but there are people really worry about that. That's going to be the end of humanity.
Replacing humans. Well, the
Hollywood, the reality is catching up to Hollywood. And so what I do is I look at the religious and social implications of all of this. That's just one thing, superintelligence, but I look at, so that's what I do. All right.
See y'all next week.